Chapter 306. Dual World Saber. Saber Dao Divine Ability. Lin Fei retreated into the room. He beheld the manual of the divine ability before him. The Dual World Saber. It was a genuine Saber Dao divine ability. Today, Lin Fei witnessed Sovereign Yuan manifesting the Sword Dao divine ability. Its potency was undoubtedly impressive. Where there's Sword Dao divine ability, there's Saber Dao divine ability. Correspondingly, if there exists a Sword Realm or Saber Domain, cultivating Sword Dao or Saber Dao divine abilities becomes relatively easier. Previously, Lin Fei hadn't practiced the Saber Dao divine ability simply because he hadn't found an apt one. Moreover, he already possessed a Saber Domain, feeling that practicing Saber Dao divine ability might not hold much significance. To achieve the status of martial king, especially a king of powerful lineage, one's divine abilities shouldn't be too uniform. Variety was essential. Diversity was key. A wide array of skills was preferable. One should have a touch of every divine ability. The ancient origin sect, however, lacked top-tier Saber Dao divine abilities. If Lin Fei persisted on a single path, acquiring 9 top-notch Saber Dao great divine abilities might be a different journey. Thus, Lin Fei chose other great divine abilities. The outcome had been rather fruitful. Yet, this Dual World Saber was distinctive. When the saber strikes, it splits 2 realms. One realm experiences mortal demise and the other, spiritual annihilation. This was indeed a supreme great divine ability. Lin Fei even faintly felt that this Dual World Saber surpassed his Black Wind Prison and Gravity Domain. However powerful a divine ability might be, one must start as a beginner. Facing the Saber Dao great divine ability, Lin Fei naturally invoked his Saber Domain, seeking to subdue this divine ability. With a thunderous roar, Lin Fei manifested his Saber Domain. Instantaneously, the Saber Domain enveloped the Dual World Saber manual. Follow me and become my divine ability. In the future, if I become the martial king, you will fully integrate into my bloodline. You will be eternal, indestructible for all ages. Lin Fei addressed the Dual World Saber. With the support of his Saber Domain, any ordinary Saber Dao divine ability would undoubtedly be unproblematic. Lin Fei waited in stillness. Time ticked away. After a quarter of an hour, Lin Fei's brow furrowed. The Dual World Saber remained unresponsive. No response. Is it unwilling, or are my terms insufficiently enticing? Lin Fei had the Saber Domain and ambitions of becoming the martial king. Was this not enough? Typically, top-tier great divine abilities, under the influence of Lin Fei's Saber Domain and the grand ambition to become martial king, would readily succumb. Yet, the Dual World Saber remained unresponsive. The Dual World Saber is prideful, refusing to serve the host. Refused. In Lin Fei's mind, the system's voice finally rang out. With seemingly no reason, it was simply unwilling. Fire. Lin Fei's gaze grew icy. Apparently, the Dual World Saber responded better to force than coaxing. He conjured flames, immediately setting the Dual World Saber manual ablaze. After all, he had committed the Dual World Saber manual to memory. He could easily recreate it if needed. The Dual World Saber would rather die than serve, preferring to be reduced to ashes than to follow the host. Lin Fei fell silent. It was the first time he encountered such a situation. While he had faced refusals from divine abilities or martial arts in the past, usually, when he threatened to destroy their manuals, they would relent. Yet, this Dual World Saber showed a true spine. It preferred death over servitude. In that case, Lin Fei prepared to truly burn the Dual World Saber manual. Would a recreated Dual World Saber have a different temperament? Your divine ability Black Wind Prison sensed the disdain of the Dual World Saber and is aggrieved. It has now challenged the Dual World Saber. Your divine ability Gravity Domain sensed the disdain of the Dual World Saber and is aggrieved. It too has now challenged the Dual World Saber. Again, the system's voice resonated in Lin Fei's mind. He hadn't expected his 2 divine abilities to defend his honor, directly challenging the Dual World Saber. So, Lin Fei closed his eyes, focusing his consciousness inward. Indeed, in his mind's eye, 3 luminous orbs manifested. They were Black Wind Prison, Gravity Domain, and Jewel World Saber. Black Wind Prison and Gravity Domain jointly assailed the Jewel World Saber. Yet, the Jewel World Saber was truly remarkable. With a single strike, both Black Wind Prison and Gravity Domain seemed hard-pressed to defend. Watching as his 2 divine abilities seemed to be steadily losing ground, Lin Fei's heart grew cold. Regardless, Black Wind Prison and Gravity Domain were his divine abilities. They had even taken the initiative to battle the Jewel World Saber. How could Lin Fei stand by and watch them be defeated? Saber Intent. In the next moment, Lin Fei unleashed his Saber Intent. For only the Saber Intent could aid Black Wind Prison and Gravity Domain within his mind. Moreover, Lin Fei possessed not just one type of Saber Intent, but hundreds. Boom! Countless Saber Intents, like a massive tidal wave, rushed toward the Jewel World Saber. Black Wind Prison and Gravity Domain, sensing Lin Fei's support, were reinvigorated, charging at the Jewel World Saber once more. There's truth to the saying that many ants can kill an elephant. Eventually, the Jewel World Saber was completely overwhelmed by the myriad of Saber Intents. Your divine abilities, Black Wind Prison and Gravity Domain, have together defeated Jewel World Saber. Jewel World Saber, defeated by the host's divine abilities, has completely surrendered and wishes to become the host's divine ability. The divine ability Jewel World Saber has become the host's divine ability. Upon sensing the host Saber Domain, divine ability Jewel World Saber is infused and its cultivation progress instantly increases by 200%. Your divine ability Jewel World Saber has advanced to mastery. Your divine ability Jewel World Saber has ascended to transcendence. A series of notifications from the system echoed in Lin Fei's mind. Simultaneously, a new memory emerged. It was his hard work in cultivating the divine ability Jewel World Saber, progressing from beginner to mastery and then to transcendence. It took a whole hour for Lin Fei to fully assimilate this memory. Whoosh! Lin Fei opened his eyes. System. Immediately, Lin Fei accessed the system panel to check on his martial arts progress. Host, Lin Fei. Martial arts realm, early martial sovereign. Great divine ability, Black Wind Prison, perfection. Great divine ability, Gravity Domain, perfection. Great divine ability Jewel World Saber, transcendence, progress 0. Saber Domain, beginner, progress 0. Lin Fei's list of divine abilities had expanded with the addition of Jewel World Saber. And it had directly reached transcendence. This divine ability. Lin Fei was at a loss for words. Jewel World Saber, which was initially so challenging to even begin, had stoutly refused to follow him. But now, it had skyrocketed from beginner to transcendence. However, after sifting through his memories about the Jewel World Saber, Lin Fei couldn't help but gasp in astonishment. Powerful. Incredibly powerful. He had encountered numerous divine abilities, be it lesser divine abilities, great divine abilities, or even top-tier great divine abilities. Yet, none could compare to this Jewel World Saber. In a single word, it was ferocious. It was a divine ability that epitomized ferocity to the utmost. Let's give it a try. With a single step, Lin Fei exited the room. Chapter 307. The Power of Jewel World Saber. Lin Fei had already flown away from the Shao family. He flew continuously, directly reaching a mountain range. If he wanted to test his new ability, Lin Fei naturally needed a place without constraints. In populated areas, it would be inconvenient. This dense forest, devoid of any human presence, was populated with flora, fauna, and various wild beasts. Perhaps even some exotic beasts. It was the most fitting place for a test. Floating above the mountain range, Lin Fei looked down, seeing the lush forest below and the various wild animals roaming within. The next moment, a life wheel emerged behind Lin Fei. On the life wheel, 3 layers of light emerged, representing his 3 divine abilities. The third layer of light represented Lin Fei's newly acquired divine ability, Jewel World Saber. Although it was a transcendence, it wasn't yet perfected. Yet, the glow of the dual-world saber was even more radiant and vast than that of the perfected gravity domain and black wind prison. The brighter and more radiant the light, the stronger the divine ability. Dual-world saber, strike. With a mere thought, Lin Fei unleashed the divine ability, dual-world saber. He didn't have a saber, but he had the power of the life wheel. Lin Fei's life will power had merged with the saber essence. So, at this moment, the power of the life will materialized, forming a saber. This saber was not particularly large, merely tens of meters. Compared to Lin Fei's previously used sabers, which stretched thousands of meters, it seemed insignificant. Yet, this tens of meters long saber seemed to contain terrifying power. Boom. With a slash, the saber cut through the air. It didn't create a world-shaking tremor, no roaring winds, no earth-shattering quakes. However, this singular slash, merely seeing it made one's heart race. Whoosh! The dual-world saber descended, and a saber of tens of meters fell from the sky, dropping into the forest below. The forest wasn't bisected. The ground didn't crack. Instead, an invisible force instantly split the entire forest in two. On the left, whether it was plants, animals, or even stones, everything vanished. Turned to dust. As if erased from existence by some tremendous power. On the right, everything remained intact. Trees, flowers, even the stones on the ground, and fallen leaves. Everything was unharmed. Only the animals and insects suddenly and silently fell. Without any visible injuries, they just dropped dead. Their life force rapidly fades, turning them into cold, lifeless bodies. Dead silence. On the right side of the forest, there was utter silence. It was as if the consciousness or spirit of these creatures had been completely erased. Even the mighty bodies of some creatures had no resistance to offer. On one side, devastation, on the other, a silent void. It was as if they were two distinct worlds. This is the dual-world saber. One saber splits two realms. One slash ends life, another obliterates the spirit. Lin Fei murmured softly. He finally grasped the meaning of the two worlds in the dual-world saber. One side met physical annihilation, completely obliterated. On the other side, consciousness and spirit are wiped away, dying in absolute silence. One slash manifesting two different worlds. This kind of divine ability, Lin Fei felt, was quite unlike any other great divine abilities. Martial arts can reach divinity. This divine ability is almost a miracle. Lin Fei murmured to himself. Even with his vast experience, he was stunned by the might of this single slash. However, as powerful as this saber skill was, Lin Fei faced a dilemma. How could he perfect the dual-world saber? What conditions were needed? Gravity domain requires gravitational force. Black wind prison requires yin chi. So what about dual-world saber? Lin Fei was at a loss. Closing his eyes, he once again sorted through his memories of the dual-world saber. This technique, in essence, incorporated the powers of yin and yang, spirit, annihilation, and more. Although it's just one slash, one divine ability, it melds multiple powers together, thus resulting in this divine ability. If it were used within the realm of saber domain, the might of this slash would be even more terrifying. Cultivating the dual-world saber is extremely challenging. It relies heavily on comprehension. However, comprehension can be elusive. That's it. Maybe there's another way. Lin Fei thought of a solution. Saber domain. If he could enhance his saber domain and elevate it from a beginner to mastery, it would undergo a monumental transformation. Perhaps then, the dual-world saber could reach its pinnacle. After all, no matter how strong a saber-related divine ability is, it still pertains to the Tao of the saber. And as the saber domain evolves and progresses, it remains aligned with the Tao of the saber. The two are deeply connected. Otherwise, how could saber domain augment and enhance the power of the dual-world saber? However, how does one elevate the saber domain? Lin Fei had developed the saber domain for quite some time, yet it remained at the beginner stage. The progress was still at zero. There hasn't been any advancement. Methods like saber techniques, saber intent, and saber momentum seem to be of limited help for the saber domain. Perhaps by integrating with other saber domains, I might be able to progress in its cultivation. But no saber technique can be cultivated directly to the level of the saber domain. At best, one reaches saber momentum. Lin Fei's cultivation of the saber domain had reached a bottleneck. In the past, Lin Fei integrated directly. But now, saber techniques can only reach the momentum. None can be directly cultivated into the realm of the saber domain. After all, the realm of the saber domain corresponds to that of a martial sovereign. And those at the level of martial sovereign are already cultivating divine abilities. Who would then delve deep into saber techniques, let alone evolve them into the saber domain? This path seems impassable. Wait, honing the saber domain might still boost its cultivation. But I'd need another powerful martial domain to sharpen the saber domain. Where can I find such a powerful martial domain? A thought flashed through Lin Fei's mind. Powerful martial domains, hadn't one appeared today? And so, in a flash, Lin Fei's figure transformed into a streak of light, disappearing into the horizon. The sun was rising. On a steep peak, below lay a bottomless cliff. At this moment, Sovereign Yuan sat cross-legged at the edge. He seemed to have been sitting there for a long time. In his hand, he held a sword. This sword was merely made of common iron, not some divine weapon. Yet, it was the sword that had been with Sovereign Yuan since his weaker days. Defeating enemies, defending against rivals, guarding Sovereign Yuan on his journey to become a martial sovereign. It was Sovereign Yuan's guardian sword. As Sovereign Yuan infused it with various materials, even this common iron blade began to transform. Sovereign Yuan could even sense that this mundane sword now seemed to possess a vague consciousness, connecting with his soul. Suddenly, Sovereign Yuan's eyes snapped open. He grasped the sword tightly. I'm not mistaken. Although the sword domain's transcendence couldn't suppress his saber domain, my path is not wrong. If the transcendence sword domain fails to suppress, then I'll perfect the sword domain. Though his divine ability is powerful, my path is that of the sword. Divine ability is but an aid. Even if I become a martial king, my way is the sword. Nothing can shake my will. The next moment, the sword in Sovereign Yuan's hand vibrated. It seemed to emit a sword aura, brighter than ever before. What a commitment to the Tao of the sword. I never expected someone to follow the Tao of the sword with such determination. From behind Sovereign Yuan, a familiar voice sounded. Chapter 308. Threat. Lin Fei stood behind Sovereign Yuan. He searched for several days before finally finding him. Sovereign Yuan turned, laying eyes upon Lin Fei. Sovereign Lin, having manifested the saber domain, I assume your Tao is that of the saber, he remarked calmly. Saber Tao. Lin Fei shook his head. No, you are mistaken. I don't tread the saber Tao. Even though I have cultivated the saber domain, I have never contemplated embracing the saber Tao. The saber technique and saber domain are merely instruments to guard my Tao. My pursuit is the Tao of immortality. Whether it be the martial Tao, the saber Tao, or any other, I am willing to explore any that grants me eternity. Lin Fei spoke with an unwavering tone. His devotion wasn't singularly to the saber Tao. For him, being devoid of the saber Tao didn't mean being devoid of life's purpose. Lin Fei wasn't that fanatical. From the very beginning, Lin Fei had always trodden the path of immortality, and this conviction remained steadfast, impervious to doubt. The Tao of immortality. Sovereign Yuan contemplated, not probing further. Everyone has their own Tao. Who, amongst those who attained the title of martial sovereign, did not possess their own Tao? The only difference was the strength of their conviction. Sovereign Yuan didn't need to gauge others' determination, his own unwavering belief was sufficient. Sovereign Lin, reaching this place must have taken some effort on your part. What brings you to me? Sovereign Yuan inquired directly. It's simple, Lin Fei replied. Though I don't tread the saber Tao, I wish to enhance my saber domain. To do so, I believe only immense pressure can hone it. And your sword domain is apt for that. Sovereign Yuan instantly understood. Lin Fei came to spar to harness the power of Sovereign Yuan's sword domain to elevate his saber domain. Sovereign Yuan fell silent. Assisting would be effortless, even beneficial for Hen. Perhaps their realms could mutually elevate. But he also bore pride. Why should I aid you? Lin Fei had defeated Sovereign Yuan. To claim that this left no dent in Sovereign Yuan's pride would be false. Now, he was expected to assist Lin Fei in advancing the saber domain. Sovereign Yuan was reluctant. Why aid me? Lin Fei responded with a smile. Helping me is akin to helping yourself, Lin Fei said calmly. Refuse and you die. For I shall lend you. The atmosphere immediately grew tense, almost palpable. Both parties fell silent. You'd kill me. Sovereign Yuan's eyes frosted over even more. In the sheer residence, you indeed bested me, Sovereign Lin. But if I wish to leave, none can hold me. Not even you. His confidence was unmistakable. He had been defeated by Lin Fei, yes, but to kill him. Impossible. If he chose to leave, Lin Fei couldn't stop him. Is that so? Lin Fei countered, observed the saber technique, Sovereign Yuan. With a single stride, the life will behind Lin Fei manifested. Atop the life will shimmered 3 layers of light, representing 3 divine abilities. Sovereign Yuan recalled clearly, back in the jewels at the Xia family, Lin Fei's life will displayed only 2. Meaning that at that time, Lin Fei possessed merely 2 divine abilities. Now, a 3rd had appeared. In such a brief span, Lin Fei had cultivated yet another divine ability. Sovereign Yuan's focus shifted to the currently displayed 3rd divine ability. Countless energies from the life will coalesced into a saber in the void. A saber, spanning tens of meters, looked enigmatic. It lacked the might to move mountains, to obliterate all or the grandeur of the heavens. Yet, a mere glance and Sovereign Yuan felt a tremor in his heart. This saber was no ordinary blade, or rather, this divine ability was extraordinary. Yet Lin Fei had merely displayed this divine ability, not even invoking his saber domain. Divine ability, Dual World Saber. Strike. With that declaration, Lin Fei's saber slashed forth in an instant. There was no earth-shattering prowess with this move. On the surface, it seemed a common saber strike. However, once that blade descended, an alarm rang in Sovereign Yuan's heart. An immense danger enveloped him, a sensation suggesting that if he failed to block this saber, his end would be certain. Sovereign Yuan's senses were incredibly sharp, and they had never betrayed him before. Yet, now, he felt an ominous premonition. There was only one reason for it: this saber was immensely powerful. Clang. Without a hint of hesitation, Sovereign Yuan drew his sword. As it left its sheath, a sword domain erupted instantaneously. Furthermore, the Vajra unbreakable chain's divine ability enveloped him. This particular sword unleashed a radiant beam spanning hundreds of meters, tearing through the sky. Within the sword domain, it felt as though countless sharp blades hovered just above, each amplifying the power of Sovereign Yuan's strike, elevating it to earth-shattering proportions. Yet, when the sword met Lin Fei's saber's glow, crack. The sword shattered. Simultaneously, 2 peculiar forces targeted the Sovereign Yuan. The Vajra unbreakable chains around him held for a mere moment before disintegrating. Sovereign Yuan felt as if a mysterious force had struck his consciousness. His mind went blank, and his body began disintegrating, turning into ashes bit by bit. Sovereign Yuan's sword domain swiftly contracted, vibrating as if resisting a formidable force. In the end, the sword domain held firm. The power of Lin Fei's Dual World Saber had been entirely depleted. Sovereign Yuan survived. However, his situation was dire. One could even say he was in a terribly disheveled state. Nearly half of his body had vanished. His face was ghastly pale, and though his mind wasn't entirely blank, it felt like a heavy blow had struck his consciousness, almost scattering it. The agony was almost unbearable. Sovereign Yuan, with the support of his sword domain, managed to deplete the power of Lin Fei's Dual World Saber. but it's worth noting that Lin Fei had only used the Dual World Saber divine ability. He hadn't invoked his Saber domain or any other divine abilities. Just a single strike of the Dual World Saber and Sovereign Yuan was almost overwhelmed. He had narrowly escaped death. What kind of divine ability is this? Sovereign Yuan asked in a deep voice, his gaze fixed intently on Lin Fei. It's the Saber Dao divine ability, Dual World Saber, Lin Fei responded. The saber divides into two realms. One side results in physical death and the other leads to spiritual annihilation. Sovereign Yuan, the fact that you could withstand a single saber indeed surprised me. But how about the second saber? The third? Or countless more? How many can you fend off? Lin Fei's words rendered Sovereign Yuan silent. True, he had managed to block one saber, and perhaps, by pushing his limits, he might block two or even three. Even if he unleashed his ace divine ability, how many more sabers could he possibly block? Moreover, Lin Fei still had other divine abilities up his sleeve. At that moment, Sovereign Yuan had to admit that Lin Fei truly possessed the strength to kill him. Neither spoke. The two of them simply stood still, locked in a distant standoff. Lin Fei waited patiently for Sovereign Yuan's response. His demands might seem domineering, but it was actually a win-win. Lin Fei was determined to employ every means necessary to achieve his objective. As for whether Sovereign Yuan would agree, Lin Fei was uncertain. He was only sure of one thing: if Sovereign Yuan didn't comply, then he would unleash another saber, two sabers, or countless more until he slew Sovereign Yuan. It wasn't merely a threat, he meant every word. Chapter 309. Mastery. I want to learn the divine ability, Dual World Saber. Sovereign Yuan declared. In exchange, I will spar with you using my sword domain against your saber domain. Sovereign Yuan ceased his words, setting forth his conditions with the Dual World Saber as the currency of exchange. The strike from just a moment ago truly sent chills down his spine. That saber technique was too captivating, surpassing any divine ability that Sovereign Yuan had ever seen. Even though the Dual World Saber was rooted in the Saber Dao, any divine ability can be cultivated. And Sovereign Yuan desired to master this particular saber technique. Lin Fei observed Sovereign Yuan in silence. The latter resembled a sword, cold and resolute. Even if Lin Fei declined the exchange and killed Sovereign Yuan, it would be impossible to coerce him into helping hone Lin Fei's saber domain. This was Sovereign Yuan's indomitable spirit. Agreed. Lin Fei responded. While the Dual World Saber was indeed a top-tier great divine ability, he realized after acquiring it just how challenging it was to cultivate. Even for beginners, mastering it seemed like an insurmountable task. Without hesitation, Lin Fei handed over the Dual World Saber scripture to Sovereign Yuan. After a careful look, Sovereign Yuan promptly returned the manual to Lin Fei, remarking, "No wonder Sovereign Lin agreed so readily. I cannot cultivate this divine ability." Sovereign Yuan had aspirations to become a martial king. He did not want to waste time on a divine ability if he couldn't cultivate it. Even if one manages to initiate the practice, a divine ability requires mastery, transcendence, and eventual perfection. How much time and effort would that consume? Lin Fei's choice to cultivate the Dual World Saber earned him Sovereign Yuan's newfound respect. At least in terms of talent for the Dual World Saber, Lin Fei surpassed Sovereign Yuan. Do you want to refine your saber domain? Sovereign Yuan questioned. It indeed is a sound approach. However, the extent to which your saber domain can be enhanced depends entirely on you. A humming sound resonated. In the next moment, Sovereign Yuan released his sword domain. Lin Fei did the same with his saber domain. What ensued was a pure contest between the two domains, saber against sword. With the sharpening pressure from Sovereign Yuan's transcendent sword domain, Lin Fei's saber domain finally began to ascend. 5%, 10%, 15%, 20%. Lin Fei's saber domain steadily climbed. Thus, a day, 2 days, 3 days passed. Lin Fei and Sovereign Yuan settled on the mountain together, sparring daily to compare and contrast their saber and sword domains. With each passing day, Sovereign Yuan grew increasingly astonished and eventually even numb to the progress. He had always considered himself to possess a top-tier talent in swordsmanship, having cultivated his sword domain to the state of transcendence and even believed reaching perfection was within reach. Yet, every day he felt the progress in Lin Fei's saber domain, advancing from beginner stages, little by little, toward mastery. Moreover, Lin Fei made an exciting discovery. As his saber domain grew, his dual-world saber divine ability was also improving. Though the increments were modest, there was undeniable progress, a delightful twofold benefit. Over time, a synergy developed between Lin Fei and Sovereign Yuan. Their sparring extended beyond just the domains to also encompass their divine abilities. Both being martial experts with distinct divine abilities, their exchanges felt seamless. Furthermore, Sovereign Yuan was experiencing his advancements. His third divine ability had already reached the state of transcendence and was on the brink of perfection. But that tiny gap felt insurmountable, impossible to bridge. However, after sparring with Lin Fei, he sensed a subtle shift in this third divine ability, attributed to Lin Fei's gravity domain. This third divine ability was essentially a life-preserving technique, somewhat akin to an undying state. This was why Sovereign Yuan had never revealed it, as it functioned more passively, focusing on preservation. Had Lin Fei genuinely attempted to kill Sovereign Yuan, he would have to deploy all his divine abilities and expend an extensive amount of time. It was evident Lin Fei had underestimated Sovereign Yuan. Who would have thought that Sovereign Yuan's third divine ability was purely a life-preserving technique? With his sword domain, 3 great divine abilities, and a life-preserving ability, killing Sovereign Yuan would be immensely challenging. In the blink of an eye, over a month passed. Boon. One day, while Lin Fei was engaged in a sparring match with Sovereign Yuan, Lin Fei's saber domain began to expand wildly. Concurrently, the sky was filled with flames and saber glows under the coverage of the saber domain. The domain's pressure surged immensely, to the point where even Sovereign Yuan's transcendent sword domain was barely holding up against the onslaught. Has he broken through? Sovereign Yuan felt a chill in his heart. He looked at Lin Fei. This situation only occurs when the saber domain breaks through. For a moment, Sovereign Yuan felt a mix of emotions. In just over a month, Lin Fei's saber domain had made a breakthrough. And it was all due to his sword domain's sharpening. This rate of progress and improvement was simply unbelievable. Meanwhile, Lin Fei's mind roared, and he seemed to hear the system's voice faintly. Your saber domain, after days of diligent cultivation, has progressed by 100%. Your saber domain has broken through to mastery. In Lin Fei's mind, memories of mastering the saber domain appeared. After sorting out these memories, Lin Fei willed it, and buzz. Saber domain expanded again, sweeping towards Sovereign Yuan. Sovereign Yuan understood Lin Fei's intention, immediately releasing his transcendent sword domain. Boom. 2 martial domains. 1 mastery saber domain. 1 transcendent sword domain. Both are extremely terrifying martial domains. Now, they were clashing head-on. Even without their divine abilities, the power they emitted was already far beyond any top-notch great divine ability. Your saber domain. Sovereign Yuan's expression changed instantly. In fact, when Lin Fei's saber domain was at beginner level, Sovereign Yuan's sword domain could always suppress it. But now, when Lin Fei's saber domain reached mastery, Sovereign Yuan's sword domain could no longer suppress it. The two were nearly equal. Even if the sword domain had a slight advantage, it was only a slight upper hand. Just using the sword domain, Sovereign Yuan couldn't do anything to Lin Fei. It's worth noting that this is only the mastery level of saber domain. For a moment, Sovereign Yuan felt a mix of emotions. Even if his martial heart was firm, at this moment, he felt some unusual emotions. Sovereign Lin, your saber domain is now on par with my sword domain. Sovereign Yuan calmly stated. Both of them withdrew their domains. System. Lin Fei thought to himself, immediately calling up the system panel. Host, Lin Fei. Martial Arts Realm, Early Martial Sovereign. Great divine ability, Black Wind Prison, perfection. Great divine ability, Gravity Domain, perfection. Great divine ability, Dual World Saber, transcendence, progress 50%. Saber Domain, mastery, progress 0%. Indeed, Lin Fei's Saber Domain had reached mastery. However, what surprised Lin Fei more was his great divine ability, Dual World Saber. Its cultivation progress was 0 before. But now, the progress of the Dual World Saber has reached 50%. When did this happen? After thinking back, he realized. It must have been when Saber Domain broke through to mastery that the Dual World Saber also improved. Perhaps this is the benefit of the Saber Way divine ability. As Lin Fei's Saber Domain improved, his Saber Way divine ability could also improve. And it directly improved by 50%. That is to say, if Lin Fei's Saber Domain could reach transcendence, would his Dual World Saber possibly reach perfection? For a moment, Lin Fei was filled with excitement. Sovereign Yuan, let's continue. Lin Fei wished he could use every moment of every day to hone his Saber Domain. While he could withstand it, Sovereign Yuan couldn't. Chapter 310. Saber Sovereign Sect. Lin Fei and the Sovereign Yuan continued to refine their Saber Domain. However, Lin Fei's Saber Domain was now on par with the Sword Domain of Sovereign Yuan. Their current refinement served as a mutual honing. To Sovereign Yuan's surprise, his Sword Domain had seen an improvement. Albeit a slight one, there was a definitive enhancement. Such progress was a delightful surprise. As time passed, Lin Fei's Saber Domain also improved, but at an ever-decreasing rate. A month later, the progress of Lin Fei's Saber Domain had grown by merely 10%. More concerning, in recent days, there has been hardly any noticeable improvement. Sovereign Lin, Sovereign Yuan began, his voice measured, I assume you've noticed. Your Saber Domain has barely improved. Similarly, my Sword Domain experienced initial growth but slowed down considerably, with little to no subsequent enhancement. It seems the pressure our domains impose upon each other has lessened. There's little point in continuing this mutual refinement. Lin Fei understood that their time together had come to an end. Sovereign Yuan, it's time for me to take my leave, he remarked without further elaboration. In reality, the two had sparred atop the mountain for over 2 months and had forged a bond of friendship. Sovereign Yuan had not left empty-handed either. Even though he wouldn't practice the Dual World Saber, under Lin Fei's Gravity Domain, his third divine ability had advanced rapidly, nearing perfection. It would be perfected in a month. Regardless, Sovereign Yuan was sure his third divine ability would soon reach its pinnacle. Thereafter, he'd commence his training in the fourth divine ability. Progressing from 3 to 4 divine abilities might seem minor, but for a martial sovereign, it signified the leap from an early to a mid-stage martial sovereign, a significant advancement. Furthermore, Sovereign Yuan's Sword Domain had also undeniably improved. Sovereign Lin, Sovereign Yuan's voice echoed as Lin Fei departed, I hope, upon our next meeting, you won't disappoint me. Without turning his head, Lin Fei responded, anyone who falls behind me will only find the gap widening. His voice lingered in the void as he walked away, leaving Sovereign Yuan perched on the cliff, pondering for a long while. Upon Lin Fei's return to the Xiao family, Xiao Yuchen immediately approached him. Sovereign Lin, where have you been all this while? A hint of relief graced her features upon seeing Lin Fei. Although Lin Fei had mentioned he'd be refining his Saber Domain, 2 months without a word had caused Xiao Yuchen some distress, especially when she couldn't locate Lin Fei. Aurora Sovereign, what can I do for you? Lin Fei inquired, not divulging his time with Sovereign Yuan. Sovereign Lin, didn't you express a desire to cultivate your Saber Domain? Xiao Yuchen inquired with a hint of mischief in her gaze. I know of a place that might assist in its refinement. Oh? What place is that? Lin Fei's eyes sharpened, locking onto Aurora's Sovereign with keen interest. While Lin Fei had achieved mastery in his Saber Domain, reaching transcendence seemed a distant dream, leaving him somewhat exasperated. He was uncertain where to venture next for its further enhancement. Xiao Yuchen chuckled, it's quite serendipitous, actually. Recently, a martial arts sect under the Shao family's banner sought our assistance. This sect is known as the Saber Sovereign Sect. A bold name, indeed. Due to their plea for aid, I delved deeper into their background. It appears the Saber Sovereign Sect once basked in glory. Established by a paramount martial sovereign, he was entitled Saber Sovereign without reason. The sect's founding master was a saber enthusiast, having not only evolved a saber domain but attained its perfect domain. However, after the founder's demise, the Saber Sovereign Sect gradually waned. Eventually, unable to sustain themselves, they sought the patronage of our Shao family. Initially, we welcomed them. They had a martial sovereign after all. Yet, as time went on, they no longer boasted even a single martial sovereign, merely retaining some martial states. Consequently, our family began overlooking the sect. Their recent plea indicates a dire predicament, even the potential of their complete obliteration. Our family wasn't initially inclined to intervene. The Saber Sovereign Sect, while nominally under the Shao banner, has progressively reduced its yearly tribute. We even contemplated expelling them. However, Xiao Yuchen paused for emphasis, considering that the Saber Sovereign Sect once produced a martial sovereign with a perfected saber domain. I thought their knowledge could benefit Sovereign Lin. Hence, I've undertaken their case. Would Sovereign Lin be interested in visiting the Saber Sovereign Sect? With our Shao family's token in hand, and should you resolve their predicaments, wouldn't their saber domain archives be at your disposal? Lin Fei's eyes gleamed with renewed interest. The Saber Sovereign Sect was established by a Saber Sovereign who achieved a perfect saber domain. Being called a Saber Sovereign, it was clear that this was a true saber practitioner, someone who truly walked the saber path. Even if the Saber Sovereign Sect was now in decline, they surely still retained treasures or knowledge left by the great Saber Sovereign. Any information, especially concerning the perfect saber domain, was invaluable to Lin Fei. Thank you for the offer, Aurora Sovereign, Lin Fei responded gratefully. I am indeed keen on visiting the Saber Sovereign Sect. Xiao Yuchen nodded and handed Lin Fei the Shao family's token, along with a map to the Saber Sovereign Sect's location. Sovereign Lin, you can embark on your journey to the Saber Sovereign Sect whenever you please. It was evident that Xiao Yuchen was going out of her way to assist Lin Fei. However, after some hesitation, Lin Fei spoke. Aurora Sovereign, I wish to visit the Martial Qin Tower. The Martial Qin Tower? Yes, I aim to challenge the third floor of the Martial Qin Tower. Once I succeed, Aurora Sovereign, you'll gain access to the blood pool on the same floor. Lin Fei was well versed with the rules of the Martial Qin Tower. Passing the third floor or any subsequent ones granted eligibility to use the blood pool. But whether one chooses to utilize it depends on the individual's decision. Usually, warriors would only venture into the third floor blood pool after mastering the third divine ability. And once their bloodline was awakened there, they could directly activate the fourth divine ability. Xiao Yuchen looked surprised. She hadn't expected Lin Fei to be ready to challenge the third floor so soon. Sovereign Lin, there's no need to rush. My own third divine ability might take anywhere from a year to even more than a decade to master. So there's ample time. She thought that Lin Fei might be hastening his decision as a gesture of gratitude for her help. However, Lin Fei clarified, Aurora Sovereign, I fear I might inadvertently perfect the dual world saber and even begin cultivating the fourth divine ability. If that happens, I'll lose my eligibility to challenge the third floor. Wouldn't that deprive you of an opportunity to access the blood pool? Xiao Yuchen's smile faltered slightly. She seemed caught off guard, a touch of embarrassment evident on her face. Lin Fei's reasoning made sense. If he advanced too swiftly, surpassing a certain level and cultivating the fourth divine ability, then indeed she would lose a chance at the blood pool's benefits. Such a logical argument, yet it left a strange taste in Xiao Yuchen's mouth. Anyone else making such a claim might be met with skepticism, but when it came from Lin Fei, she believed it wholeheartedly. Lin Fei's prowess was such that he could indeed return from a journey having mastered the fourth divine ability. Chapter 311. Martial Qin Projection. All right then, I appreciate your efforts, Sovereign Lin. Xiao Yuchen murmured, her expression complex and thoughtful. Perhaps she had never imagined that one day the pace of cultivation could actually lag behind the opportunity to partake in the blood pools ritual. At this rate, wouldn't it be soon that Lin Fei would be attempting the 4th floor of the martial kin tower? The thought that her own third divine ability was still a ways from reaching its pinnacle made Xiao Yuchen feel a peculiar sensation in her heart. Most were eager for even a single chance to enter the blood pool and awaken their bloodlines. But she might soon find herself accumulating numerous opportunities to enter the pool. It was a blessed problem to have. It seems I should also focus on cultivating my bloodline's divine ability, she mused to herself, aiming to perfect my divine ability sooner rather than later. Prior to this, Xiao Yuchen had been calm and patient, not rushing her cultivation. But now, the urgency to hone her divine ability felt real. Subsequently, Lin Fei and Xiao Yuchen both made their way to the martial kin tower once again. There were already some individuals inside the martial kin tower. However, the 3rd floor remained unoccupied. The younger members of the Xiao family, upon seeing Lin Fei and Xiao Yuchen, felt their hearts skip a beat. Lin Fei had become a celebrity in the Xiao family. Ever since he defeated Sovereign Yuan, his fame had soared amongst the martial kin clans. Recognizing Lin Fei, they immediately concluded that Lin Fei was preparing to challenge the martial kin tower once again. Sovereign Lin, who passed the 2nd floor of the martial kin tower not too long ago, is now aiming for the 3rd floor. How much time has passed since his last attempt? Is he ready for the 3rd floor already? After his battle with Sovereign Yuan, Sovereign Lin's strength is truly frightening. Challenging the 3rd floor doesn't seem out of reach for him. And let's not forget, Sovereign Lin has likely already cultivated the 3rd divine ability. With the power of 3 divine abilities, what could possibly hinder him from conquering the 3rd floor? Lucky Aurora's sovereign to know Sovereign Lin. In the future, will she ever lack opportunities to enter the blood pool? Even if Aurora's sovereign doesn't awaken her bloodline 9 times, awakening it 3 or 4 more times would be enough to establish her as a top-tier martial sovereign. For a moment, everyone's gaze was fixed on Xiao Yuchen, filled with envy. Deep envy. The Xiao family had originally established the martial kin tower to increase the challenge and filter out the most talented amongst them. But now, the martial kin tower had become Lin Fei's venue for accessing the blood pool ritual. Every time he succeeded, Xiao Yuchen benefited. Even if Xiao Yuchen had limited natural talent, just one emotion in the blood pool could potentially awaken her bloodline. If her luck failed her once, she had multiple chances left. It would be challenging for her not to become a top-tier martial sovereign. After all, there wasn't a weak martial sovereign in the martial kin clans. The divine abilities awakened within the martial kin bloodline were all great divine abilities, with some even being the peak among them. Regardless of the speculations, Lin Fei had already stepped into the 3rd floor of the martial kin tower. This floor was still populated by exotic beasts, 3 of them. But in addition to these beasts, there was also a shadowy figure. The beast didn't attack immediately. Instead, they stared intently at Lin Fei, who turned his attention to the shadow. A martial kin projection? How can there be a martial kin projection? It seems there really is a martial kin projection within the martial kin tower. It's unbelievable. Why would a martial kin projection appear during Sovereign Lin's attempt? When a martial kin projection appears, it indicates that the martial kin tower has taken issue with the one attempting to ascend it. Ha ha. I understand now. Sovereign Lin has been progressing too rapidly, moving from the 1st to the 3rd floor of the martial kin tower in just a few months. Maybe the martial kin tower thinks that Sovereign Lin is too strong and has used some unsavory means to ascend, even if it can't detect what those means are. Therefore, it has activated its strongest mechanism against him. This is nearly the strongest force that can manifest on the 3rd floor of the martial kin tower. Sovereign Lin ascended too quickly, so now he's run into trouble. With the appearance of the martial kin projection, it's likely that Sovereign Lin will fail this time. Witnessing the martial kin projection, the crowd was in an uproar. Some were gloating over his predicament, while others were genuinely curious. Xiao Yuchen's face turned pale, an expression of concern etched on her face. Even she wasn't aware of the existence of such a projection. "Elder, what is going on here?" Xiao Yuchen hurriedly inquired of the martial Qin Tao's elder. The elder shook his head helplessly, looking as troubled as Xiao Yuchen. He began to explain slowly, "That is the martial Qin projection. The martial Qin Tower is sentient. After all, this magic treasure surpasses the typical golden core level magic treasure. Sovereign Lin's progress from the first to the third floor happened in too short a span, less than half a year. Under normal circumstances, no martial sovereign can ascend the martial Qin Tower this quickly. This is an emergency measure of the martial Qin Tower. Hence, what Sovereign Lin faces now is the pinnacle of the power the third floor of the martial Qin Tower can muster. I'm afraid it will be very challenging for Sovereign Lin to get past this third floor." Xiao Yuchen understood. So, if one advanced too quickly through the martial Qin Tower, there would be problems. At this moment, on the third floor of the martial Qin Tower, Lin Fei had no idea what was going on. He thought that this was a regular test of the third floor of the martial Qin Tower. Thus, without a second thought, humming. In the next moment, Lin Fei's saber domain radiated out. Saber domain instantly enveloped the entire third floor of the martial Qin Tower. Roar! The three exotic beasts roared in fury. Lin Fei's mastered saber domain, with its suppressing force, had increased several times, perhaps even more than tenfold. Even though these three exotic beasts were powerful, they felt as though half their strength had been suppressed. They struggled to move. Gravity domain. Furthermore, Lin Fei took no chances. After deploying his saber domain, he also released his gravity domain. With the added weight from the gravity domain, the three exotic beasts were immediately brought down. Under the double pressure of the saber domain and the gravity domain, the three exotic beasts struggled even to twitch. Even if Lin Fei just stood still, he could suppress the three exotic beasts. However, the martial Qin projection was different. The shadow seemed like a real shadow, and it appeared unaffected. Swoosh! The shadow flashed. Without any warning, it appeared right in front of Lin Fei. Teleportation. Lin Fei's eyes narrowed slightly. He wasn't mistaken. It was teleportation. It was similar to how he teleported in his saber domain. Moreover, this shadow did not seem to be alive. There was no sign of life. Lin Fei's Black Wind prison would probably not have much effect on it. However, Lin Fei had a saber. The Dual World Saber. Klein. Lin Fei's saber appeared. Like it was drawn from its sheath. Although Lin Fei didn't have a particularly treasured saber, his divine ability, the Dual World Saber, was instantly deployed. The power of the life will formed a saber. Then, he swung it. Without a groundbreaking impact, without overwhelming power, it seemed like a light slash. When the saber was drawn, two worlds were divided. To the left, everything vanished. To the right, utter silence. The shadow paused momentarily, halting its movement. Lin Fei's saber hung right in front of the shadow. Though it was a mere slash, the shadow stopped. Even if the shadow had no life, the Dual World Saber could cause it to perish on the left. It didn't matter if there was no life. Everything vanished into oblivion. Snap. With a soft sound, the three exotic beasts disappeared instantly. The shadow also disintegrated quickly as if it had never existed. Lin Fei's figure was instantly teleported out of the martial Qin Tower. When Lin Fei came out, he saw a very bizarre scene outside. Silence. Absolute silence. Everyone's mouth was wide open, staring blankly at Lin Fei as if in disbelief. "Aurora Sovereign, what's going on?" Lin Fei asked, puzzled. Chapter 312. Saber Sovereign Sect's Plight. Xiao Yuchen stood there, her eyes wide and mouth agape. She looked towards the elder guardian of the martial Qin Tower, her gaze questioning. Was that truly the shadow projection of the martial Qin? Moreover, it hadn't displayed any formidable abilities before it was vanquished by Lin Fei's single stroke of the saber. Wait, was that the Dual World Saber? A realization seemed to dawn on Xiao Yuchen, and her eyes widened even more. The Dual World Saber. Lin Fei had only recently acquired it, no more than a couple of months prior. Yet, he had already mastered it. And it wasn't merely at the beginner level. This was a mastery level, perhaps even a transcendent level. She knew how demanding the initiation to the Dual World Saber was. Beginner was already so challenging, let alone mastering. Transcending seemed impossible. Yet, the undeniable truth stood before her eyes. Lin Fei had indeed mastered the Dual World Saber. Indeed, I fortuitously mastered the Dual World Saber. But, Aurora Sovereign, what did you mean by the shadow projection of the Martial King? Was it that shadow from earlier? Lin Fei instantly recalled the shadow. Xiao Yuchen briefly explained about the shadow projection of the Martial King, only then did Lin Fei understand. It seemed that the third level of the Martial King Tower had encountered an anomaly. Originally, there were only supposed to be those 3 exotic beasts. Yet, an additional shadow had appeared. That was the shadow projection of the Martial King. It indeed was the shadow projection. Absolutely. But why did the shadow projection appear so weak? That question, I'm afraid, is for Sovereign Lin to answer. The elder guardian of the Martial King Tower fixed his gaze intently upon Lin Fei. Lin Fei reminisced about the shadow he encountered within the Martial King Tower. When he had unleashed his saber domain and gravity domain, even the 3 exotic beasts were firmly suppressed, unable to move a muscle. However, the shadow seemed entirely unaffected. It could even teleport instantaneously. Had it been someone else, or had Lin Fei only possessed the Black Wind Prison and gravity domain, he likely wouldn't have been able to counter the shadow projection. Yet, with the Dual World Saber at his disposal, things were different. To date, the Dual World Saber was the most potent divine ability Lin Fei had ever seen. Once the Dual World Saber was drawn, few could stand against it. The truth was evident. Even the shadow projection of the Martial King was no match. The words of the elder had made the onlookers reconsider. Clearly, it wasn't that the shadow projection of the Martial King was weak, but rather that Sovereign Lin was overwhelmingly powerful. Especially that final stroke of the saber. With one swing, the shadow projection of the Martial King was instantly annihilated. That kind of power, even from a distance outside the Martial King Tower, sent chills down one's spine. Now Xiao Yuchen could enter the blood pool on the 3rd floor of the Martial King Tower. Aurora Sovereign, do you wish to enter the blood pool now? Lin Fei inquired. Xiao Yuchen hastily shook her head. My 3rd great divine ability has not been perfected yet. Entering the blood pool now would be a waste. I can wait. Hence, she promptly left the Martial King Tower with Lin Fei and returned to the courtyard. Aurora Sovereign, Lin Fei began, I must now depart for the Saber Sovereign sect. You're leaving now. Xiao Yuchen hesitated before conceding, given your current prowess, Sovereign Lin, you can travel wherever you wish. Before I go, Aurora Sovereign, please keep an eye out for any news about the Ancient Origin sect. Especially from Tai Dao Palace. Do they have any intentions towards the Ancient Origin sect? It had been several months since Lin Fei left the Ancient Origin sect. Although he speculated that Tai Dao Palace wouldn't dare act against the Ancient Origin sect, changes might have occurred over these months. Xiao Yuchen nodded, that won't be an issue. Tai Dao Palace is of the nascent Soul lineage, and many forces are watching them. It's easy to gather news about them. I'll arrange for someone to gather information about both Tai Dao Palace and Ancient Origin sect immediately. Thank you, Lin Fei replied, and without further ado, he turned and took off, flying swiftly toward the Saber Sovereign sect. At the Saber Sovereign sect, the number of disciples was now fewer than 100. It was a heart-wrenching sight. The strongest person in the Saber Sovereign sect now was only a martial sate, and not even a top-tier one, merely a mediocre martial sate. This was because they hadn't grasped the essence of the Saber momentum. How glorious was the Saber Sovereign sect in its prime days. The founding patriarch was a peak martial sovereign, having mastered the Saber domain to perfection. With over 100,000 disciples, they were once the dominant force in the region. Yet, who would have imagined the Saber Sovereign sect would fall to such a state? Report, a voice exclaimed. The Wind Thunder sect has dispatched their top foundation establishment cultivator. They've given us 3 days to relocate the Saber Sovereign sect and the Kadao Mountain Gate. If not, the foundation establishment cultivator of the Wind Thunder sect will show no mercy and might attack the Saber Sovereign sect. The entire grand hall of the Saber Sovereign sect fell silent, so quiet one could hear a pin drop. Such audacity! This is the mountain gate of our Saber Sovereign sect. How can we simply relocate? If we move, the Saber Sovereign sect will truly be finished. What will even remain of the Saber Sovereign sect? The ancestors would surely curse us from beyond for this betrayal. How could we ever face them again? For a moment, the Grand Hall was abuzz with heightened emotions. Yet, the sect master of the Saber Sovereign sect remained steeped in silence. The Wind Thunder sect pressured fiercely. Firstly, because the Saber Sovereign sect's domain was undoubtedly a geomantic treasure where spiritual chi from hundreds of miles around converged. The domain of the Wind Thunder sect paled significantly in comparison. Secondly, it was due to the Saber Sovereign sect's current decline. They had reached the nadir of their power. In the past, though the Saber Sovereign sect waned, they were shielded by the Shao family, a renowned martial kin lineage. The Wind Thunder sect wouldn't dare challenge the Saber Sovereign sect so brazenly under the Shao family's protection. However, now, the Wind Thunder sect also enjoyed the Shao family's patronage. What of the Saber Sovereign sect? They had been unable to pay their tributes for years and were on the verge of being expelled by the Shao family. Consequently, the Wind Thunder sect acted with arrogant impunity, forcing the Saber Sovereign sect to relocate. If not, they would launch a full assault. Such threats were not to be taken lightly. Perhaps the Saber Sovereign sect was indeed on the brink of extinction. Sect Master, have you sought help from the Shao family? How did the Shao family respond? For a moment, the remaining warriors of the Saber Sovereign sect and the whole gazed earnestly at their sect master. The sect master remained silent. After what felt like an eternity, he finally murmured, "The Shao family has yet to respond." Silence. The martial artists of the Saber Sovereign sect were struck down. They all grasped the gravity of the situation. It suggested that perhaps the Shao family had truly forsaken the Saber Sovereign sect. However, they bore no resentment towards the Shao family. When the Saber Sovereign sect initially sought their protection, a great deal of time had passed. They had not given much in return, and their survival until now was due to the Shao family's shielding grace. Without them, the Saber Sovereign sect would have long been destroyed. It seems our Saber Sovereign sect is now trapped in a dire strait. The position the Saber Sovereign sect finds itself in today is due to our unworthy actions. Perhaps we should have forsaken the Tao of the Saber Lomega. Regret filled the voices of many elders. Enough. Saber Sovereign sect has always been rooted in the Tao of the Saber. Is it even the Saber Sovereign sect if we abandon the Saber Tao? If the Saber Sovereign sect has indeed reached its end, those who wish to leave may do so. The sect master's eyes were bloodshot with rage. However, glancing at the young disciples below, his vigor seemed to diminish instantly. If the Saber Sovereign sect was eradicated, these disciples would be mercilessly slaughtered. An unbearable thought. But he wouldn't leave. No matter the cost. Was it wrong to dedicate ourselves solely to the Tao of the Saber? After his outcry, a thought emerged in his mind. If the Saber Sovereign sect did not revolve around the Saber, would it still retain its essence? With heavy eyes, the sect master closed them. He realized that their fate was sealed and there was no turning back. The Saber Sovereign sect's demise was inevitable under his watch. Suddenly, an unfamiliar voice echoed from outside the hall. The Saber Sovereign sect is not at fault. Neither is the Tao of the Saber. Founding on the Saber is not mistaken. You all are the ones mistaken. As the voice trailed off, a figure appeared within the hall. No one noticed his entrance. Every gaze in the vast hall was drawn to this enigmatic figure. Who are you? The sect master's eyes sharpened. The savior of the Saber Sovereign sect, Lin Fei declared calmly, hands clasped behind him.